I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Board of Education on May 2nd, 2018. Please rise for the pledge of the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Remember, Tuesday, May 15th is the budget vote. 6 in the morning till 9 at night. Polls will be open. Central Valley Elementary School and Pine Tree Elementary has artwork hanging in this room. So take a look before you leave at what our students are doing in Pine Tree. Do I have a motion to approve the revised agenda?
Motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. We'll now have comments from interested citizens about the budget. We have none. Did you want to say something on?
I actually had a brief presentation, Jonathan.
Yes, okay, yes, I thought your your usual 1 minute presentation.
I will speed it up.
You've learned
Is
from
that my
Eric.
time
You've
limit?
learned from Eric. Good.
I'll have to talk that way.
Hopefully not. I'll take that as a compliment.
So, of course it's a compliment.
Thank you. Okay, so this is our statutory budget hearing, and some of these slides and some of the information you may have seen already. I've tried to add a few new things into this, but not many. John's given me my marching orders as far as the time limit here. So I'll just say that it's interesting. I think the budget hearing, the statutory budget hearing, there's a window in which you have to have the hearing. I think it's the only mandatory budget meeting. So if we really wanted to speed things up next year, right, we could avoid it all and just have this one meeting. But of course, we don't want to do that.
Second.
But I jest. But it's interesting. It's the one meeting, and the board has already adopted the budget. All the work is done. The one statutory meeting you must hold. So, moving on, we've seen this is the budget calendar. We're at the point here where we're having our hearing, and the budget statement is available in the schools and in the local libraries. The budget statement, I brought one. It's a fairly large document. It's got a lot of components to it, including school report cards, information about the school, financial information, of course, budgetary information. The budget notice will be mailed, I think, by the end of this week. And I have, I'm showing the budget notice in the presentation. I'll show that briefly, but that has, again, budget information, a window to mail that out. It's after the hearing, but 7 days before the actual budget vote date, which is the 15th of May. And that's the last bullet here I have on the calendar. May 15th at Central Valley Elementary School. So state aid, we'll kind of skip over this. The only thing I'd like to point out is we're seeing a bit more state aid, a little more than $1 million, or just under 2%. And the other thing, we were lucky, there were several proposals the governor had made, which would essentially shift costs from the state to the local school districts. Most of those were not approved. And the other thing I wanted to point out was the authorization for school districts to create a charitable fund, which, of course, we will do if it proves to be legal and appropriate. And the charitable fund, it would enable people to make a donation to the school district, which would be a credit against their property taxes, to essentially avoid the cap on federal income taxes for state and local deduction. So we'll see how that pans out. We got some guidance recently from our attorneys, and there were a lot of ifs, if this is okay, and if, that sort of thing. So we'll see what happens with that. There's a lot of unknowns with that. Okay, tax cap, maximum allowable levy. We've discussed this quite a lot. Our maximum allowable levy for this year was 4.37%, and that's primarily due to, and I've mentioned this, the tax base growth factor, which is sort of the increase in the tax base, and ours was 1.7%, well above the county average. And then the other piece of this was the actual allowable growth factor was 2% this year. In past years, it's been less than 2. That's the growth factor that's 2% or CPI, whichever is less. So that, we run through the formula, and that's 4.3%, our maximum allowable levy. We're proposing levying at 2.86%, so well below the tax cap, I'm air quoting, or maximum allowable levy. Okay, so we've covered a lot of these budget priorities and issues. I won't go into too much detail, but we're proposing to spend more on security next year, an increase of $391,000, 4 additional instructional positions. There's some increase for transportation expenses for non-public transportation. And, of course, our increase in health insurance was 7% on the premium, which translated for us into about a $1.9 million budget-to-budget increase. So that was the single largest cost driver in the budget was health insurance this year for staff and retirees. That increase alone, our overall increase is 3.15%. That accounted for 1.12% of the 3.15. So, like a third of our increase was attributable to one item, health insurance. Okay, and so this is sort of a snapshot of the budget. So our total budget, proposed budget, is $176,593,137. That is a $5.3 million budget-to-budget increase. The percentage increase is 3.15%. Our levy, proposed levy, is $119,800,000, which is a $3.3 million increase, or 2.86%, so less than 3%. And this is a view of the 2 propositions the voters would see on the ballot this year. So, of course, the first is the general fund budget. And I just want to point out here, we're showing the total appropriations here, the total budget, the revenue budget, showing that the tax levy, which we talked about, the total non-property tax revenue, so that's mostly state aid. And then we're proposing to use $350,000 of our reserves. So appropriated reserves means reserves that we're appropriating for next year's budget. And then we're proposing to use $1.8 million of assigned or appropriated fund balance for next year's budget as well. So this is an increase. Last year we didn't use any reserves, and this is an increase from $1.6 million to $1.8 million. But again, I think we're in a good financial position, and I think this is the right thing to do. We were, as I mentioned, cited for our unemployment insurance reserve for having a bit more than we would need, so we're giving that back to the taxpayers. And the ultimate effect is the budget-to-budget increase is 3.15%, but our levy, due to that use of fund balance and reserves, is 2.86%. And then Proposition 2 is our bus and vehicle purchase. So we're proposing to buy 10 vehicles, 7 large buses, 1 large bus with undercarriage storage, and 2 Suburbans. Okay. Here's just sort of a snapshot of our budget notice, the budget mailer, which, as I said, is going to be mailed later this week, and folks will be getting that, maybe, as soon as Saturday or next week. And there's a lot of good information. It's very nice pamphlet and mailer. In the middle here is the budget notice, which has, again, a lot of the information I just covered about the budget. And one piece that's in here that's, again, required is our categorization of the budget between the 3 components, the administrative component, the program, and capital. And administrative is just sort of administrative expenses for administrators, salaries, etc. Program deals with instructional expenses and the instructional piece of the budget. And capital is buildings and grounds and debt service and any capital expenses we have. So look for that in the mail. Here, again, is the 3-part budget, administrative program, capital broken out this year into the 3 pieces. And, the administrative component, it's all the expenses you'd expect to be administrative, Board of Ed, central administration, supervision, which means any principal expenses. That's a 2020 function code in the budget, legal services, etc. Instructional is essentially teaching, teacher salaries, et cetera. And capital, I mentioned, is buildings and grounds, principally debt service and capital expenses. So here's our slide with the contingent budget rules that still apply. And when the tax cap came into effect, the contingent budget rules changed a little, where it's now the levy that cannot increase. So if the budget was to go down twice, be disapproved by the voters twice, we would have to adopt a contingent budget, and that means the levy would have to be the same, 116 million, rather than the 119 we're proposing. So that would require a reduction of about 3.3 million. There's certain statutory cuts we would have to make, meaning community use of facilities. If there's any expense, we'd have to discontinue that. Certain non-represented staff people would not be entitled to a raise, an increase, a salary increase. Equipment would have to come out of the budget. So there's a lot of cuts, mandatory cuts you have to make, and then we'd have to make additional cuts to make up this $3.3 million to reduce the proposed levy down to the current levy. And that's it. Any questions?
You've prepared things, you and your staff, very well. Appreciate it. Any questions?
I just have one question about a couple of meetings ago I had mentioned, or I asked about the health insurance, where we're asking the employees to get physicals, and are we going to use their insurance that we already pay into instead of paying separately to an outside person to come to do the physicals?
And was part of the question, Lorraine, also about, well, there might have been a slightly different question.
And also something else with the special ed.
Yes.
Right.
Using insurance.
Yes.
Because we could use the Medicaid and use, why can't we use private if it is medical as well as,
Right.
So we reached out to the attorneys because we had talked about this, I think, when we were in policy at one point. And so we reached out to Tom Scapoli, and they gave us an opinion letter, and they began the letter by saying they do not think that we can do that.
so
And
is
it
that an
gets-
opinion, or they just don't think you can do that? What does that mean?
Well, it means that they've reviewed the question.
Which
They've
one?
looked
The special ed one?
The
or-
special
The
ed one.
special ed one.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's the question that we had asked, and they said that they do not believe that, in their opinion, we should do that. They do not recommend that we do that, because there are other issues that come about as a result of that.
Interesting.
And what it essentially comes down to is we're obligated to provide certain, health-related services. I mean, there's certain things we definitely
Yes.
have to provide, nursing and screenings and things like that. But as part of the free and appropriate public education, there's also certain special ed services that are health-related that we're required to provide. And Tom's initial comment was, you could try to do that, but there's no enforcement mechanism.
That's
and,
right.
and then he later followed up in writing. I asked him for a more comprehensive answer. We asked him for a more comprehensive answer. And as Elsie said, his first paragraph was, no, you can't do it. And it has to do with the FAPE, the free and appropriate public education, because there's certain things that we are required to
And
provide.
I get that, but it's still a free education. But as far as giving OT, PT, which falls under medical insurance, it's not like we end up saving and nobody really loses because you would pay a copay. So it's less than what we would have to put out,
Yep.
originally.
I think there's
I'm just-
potentially a lot of problems with it. Number one would be, does everyone have the same kind of health insurance? The same type of, generous, rich health insurance, number one, that covers everything you might need. Number two, we started talking about logistical issues where, okay, is there a copay? Is there a deductible? What kind of policy do you have? And so we would have to start to manage that. So there was a lot of sort of logistical problems initially, and then his final sort of answer was, you can't do it. There's all these. If we wanted to really push the envelope,
I
you might,
understand.
and you
I
might
just-
have to deal with and overcome all these problems and obstacles. But our opinion is, you can't really legally do it.
Okay, I understand, and yet we can legally charge Medicaid if that student has Medicaid, right? And yet,
True.
if that student has Medicaid usually comes back and says, you have to, bill the first insurance, their primary insurance, if they have primary insurance. So how does that happen? If that's usually what Medicaid's, that's their qualification, that what their recommendation
Yeah.
is. They don't want to pay out if a student or anyone
Yeah.
has Medicaid and personal insurance. That's usually the personal insurance. Then they pick up, if it's, when they get the EOB, it'll say we're not picking it up, so then
Right.
Medicaid will pick it up. So how do you get around that?
Well, I think Medicaid is a federal program, sort of a different program, and New York State administers that, on behalf of the federal government. And number one, the child has to be Medicaid eligible, right? And so that's a very small subset of our total population. Number two, they have to be receiving the health services that we're talking about, which are principally related services.
Yep.
And typically, if they're Medicaid eligible, they do not have their own health insurance or good health
That's not
insurance.
true.
But
That's not
Okay.
all cases. And mostly you're talking about students that probably have disabilities, so they may have Medicaid for those reasons.
Oh, for other reasons, yes.
Not because of
Yes, you're right.
maybe low income or
Right.
whatever the story is.
What I was talking about is
That's
the
because-
low-income students.
Can I just stop this for a second, only because I see Karen getting over there speaking, and this is sort of the budget meeting.
No, I
But-
got you.
But can we take this offline? Because I will tell you that we did get a whole long opinion letter. And when they write an opinion, when our attorneys write an opinion, what they do is they go out and they vet the question, and then they give you a whole litany, and in the end, they say, we recommend you do this, we recommend you do not do this. And I think that there are other loopholes that we might get ourselves into trouble by asking certain kinds of questions, which I think we're not entitled to ask. So, but we can give you, what I'll do is I'll forward the opinion letter.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Right, and that was something we were planning on doing.
So then the other question that I had was if we're already paying for
No,
insurance,
we didn't ask them that.
that one is.
Right, have not
I think
followed
we
up
have-
That might
with
be
the
easier.
attorneys.
That one's the easier one.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is.
But I'll do both.
Okay,
Anything
thanks.
else on? Okay. Moving on to the next agenda item, I need a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of April 11th, the special meeting of April 19th, and the extract of minutes of April 19th.
Motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Motion to approve the superintendent evaluation form.
Motion.
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions on that?
Okay, I sent it to you. Yep.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Motion to approve the 2017-18 DASSA coordinators.
Motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Personnel, Matthew.
I respectfully request the items listed under personnel for approval.
Motion.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Business and financial. Back to you, Patrick.
I also respectfully request approval of the items on the agenda under business financial. So it's our ordinary financial reports for March. The most notable thing is the DOT agreements, which I sent the board an email on this afternoon. And as I said in the email, this essentially is advance payment, just gets us the money sooner, and we're still reserve the right to, do our own appraisal and investigate, the just compensation that they've offered us and make sure it's fair.
Do you have a motion?
Motion. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions for Patrick? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. The recommendations, motion to approve the arrangement of the recommended placements made by the Committee on Special Education and preschool special education items 10.01, 0.02, 0.03, 0.04, 0.05 on your agenda.
Motion. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Don, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes. Motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried.
Thank you.
And the